Welcome back to the To Hull and Back podcast, and today we are joined by Adam Harvey of the Pink 'Un for a Hull City versus Norwich City opposition preview. How are you doing this evening, Adam?
I'm very well, thank you. Norwich, well, I say victory. It wasn't a victory last night. It was victory on penalties, but a little bit more optimistic than I probably would have been if you'd have spoken to me after the Wigan game on Saturday.
Yeah, also we are proudly sponsored by 6 Yards Out and Pearson's Bar. The way I start these opposition previews, and I have done that with our previous opponents, Bristol City and Preston North End, is I ask you about the position you finished last season. Is that a successful season? And we were having a little bit of a joke about it before we started, but Norwich in the Premier League finished rock bottom in 20th. But I'll still ask you the question, as it's early in the season, was that a success?
Well, we did get one more point than we got the season before when we were relegated in 2019-20. So arguably you could say that it was, but on the basis of the fact that we spent, well, in the region of anywhere between sort of 50 and 70 million pounds, depending on if a lot of these add-on fees get activated, which I'll be honest, probably won't be, based on the fact that most of the business we done last season was pretty dire. I can't really say. I think they contributed to something about 3 or 4 Premier League goals between them. We brought in a lot of big money signings. Milot Rashica from Werder Bremen, who was relegated with Werder Bremen, but he's sort of a bit of a spark and a man that was linked with sort of £40 million moves a few seasons back, and I think there was a lot of optimism when he arrived. A Kosovo international, a man that has scored against teams like Bayern Munich, and I think a lot of Norwich fans thought this guy was going to be a bit of a creative outlet for us, particularly when we lost Emi Buendia, who was such a crucial component in this team, and a man who his service to Teemu Pukki was mainly the reason why we won the title 2 seasons running in terms of the championship. So he looked like the man that was going to replace him, but he really never lived up to it. He's still here, and he's actually started both the championship games so far this season. But I think most Norwich fans want him out of the team for Saturday's game against Hull, because he really has struggled with the physicality element, and his sort of last final ball in terms of getting the ball into the box to Pukki for service, it has been pretty terrible. And then in terms of other players we brought in, Lees Malou, who we've already sold 1 season in the Premier League, and he was very lightweight, didn't really fit the athletic mould that Dean Smith likes as a midfielder. Obviously, a man that was actually signed for Daniel Farke originally, so that's maybe a little bit understandable. But he's been moved on. Christoph Jolis as well, a man we bought for £9 million, supposedly a wonder kid from Greece. And again, really, really struggled. And I think only made about 4 or 5 Premier League appearances from the start last season, and he's now been sent out on loan to Feyenoord. So in terms of the business, really not good. A lot of the loan players as well. Billy Gilmore, a man that was so good for Scotland against England, and I think when he arrived at Carrow, most Norwich fans thought this guy could really be sort of a bit of a crucial cog in the midfield and getting those sort of passes through as well for Pukki, because he sort of has that vision in terms of a midfielder to find that. So it's that sort of ball in behind that Pukki loves, but again, really, really struggled. And arguably the only player that can come out of any credit maybe is Angus Gunn, and he didn't really play any football particularly, but he's a man that Norwich fans love because of his dad being a legend at the club, and a man that I think we can potentially see become a number 1 for Norwich when Tim Krul probably leaves, I'd say maybe at the end of this season. So on the whole, last season was pretty terrible, and obviously Daniel Farke was relieved of his duties after only 7 games last season, and we brought in Dean Smith, and I think there was a little bit of hope because we actually did get out of the relegation zone in January. We beat Watford 3-0 away. We beat Everton 2-1 at home. And at that point, I feel like there was a little bit of momentum. And then we lost Adam Eder to injury, and a lot of other injuries hit. And effectively, Dean Smith there was no budget in January for him to bring in any of his own players. And for that reason, we ended up finishing rock bottom and back in the championship.
So, no, not a success. That's a shame. Yeah. I was going to read out all the transfer fees to you now, but you've basically already said them all. But just one more bad one: 8 million for Josh Sargent. Got to mention that. So yeah, pretty bad. But there you go. That was last season. You spent a lot of money. Should these players that you bought last season and came from the Premier League, what about this season? Are you looking up again? Do you think you'll go up again with Dean Smith?
I think there's a bit of a mixed kind of feeling amongst the Norwich fan base at the moment. There is a group of fans that are fairly optimistic. I think a lot of that's probably been derived from the transfers we've just signed. So we've currently brought in 4 players. The first one through the door was Isaac Hayden, who obviously is a well-known midfielder, man that Hull fans will know as well, obviously.
Yeah.
I had a really successful spell at Newcastle, and obviously he's part of that old guard, I suppose, that sort of needed to be moved on at Newcastle for them to really sort of set out their new project. So he's come in on loan with an option to buy, but the problem is he came with an injury initially. He looked like he'd recovered and picked up another injury at the start of pre-season. So we haven't actually even seen him in pre-season, let alone in the actual season. And it looks like he's out until sort of the back end of August, early September. So we're yet to see him. Then we brought in Gabriel Sara from Sao Paulo. That's a £6 million fee that could potentially rise to 11 million, and probably a little bit of a surprising one. A market that Norwich have sort of looked in is Brazil. They've got a lot of scouts out there, and we've actually recently set up a sort of partnership with Cortiba, that are a top flight Brazilian team, and we're kind of looking at sort of the football inside, the coaching side, and all the off-field running of the club, and sort of the two clubs sort of share their values and their sort of in terms of a partnership. So Norwich definitely like the Brazilian market, and Gabriel Sara actually made his first start last night in the Cup against Birmingham. He's also been out injured though since April, so he's kind of coming back from an injury. He sort of made a substitute appearance against Wigan the other day for sort of 10 minutes, and he sort of got his first 60 minutes for Norwich last night, but not man I'd necessarily expect to be in the starting 11 for Saturday, but someone that definitely over the course of the season, I think there's a lot of hope that he can really kick on, because he's quite athletic and dynamic, and that's what Dean Smith wants in a midfielder. And then I suppose probably the eye-catching one is Marcelino Nunez, who we've brought in from Católica, which is the Chilean top flight, a man who's a Chile international. He's only 22 years of age, £3 million fee there attached to that one. And he scored a Panenka penalty last night against Birmingham to basically put us 3-1 up in the shootout. And he really looks like a talent. He's got a real eye for a sort of, well, I suppose like a thread, needle through the thread kind of, in terms of the way he can find balls. And that's exactly what Norwich have lacked since Buendia's departure. And I really think that he could be the man in that number 10 position to sort of be that creative sort of flair and that bit of spark that Norwich need in terms of trying to find Pukki and give him the service that effectively he thrives on in the Championship. And, you know, he's been one of the top goal scorers in this division both times he's been in here. And I feel like if Nunez can really unlock, you know, his best sort of qualities in terms of then trying to service Pukki, then we've definitely got a player there on our hands. But again, going to take a little bit of time with him. It's going to be the adaptation from playing in a relatively possession-based league to come to the Championship, where you've kind of got a lot of teams that are very physical. I mean, Wigan are the prime example of that the other day. He probably did struggle a little bit with the physicality of the likes of Tom Naylor, Max Power, etc. in the Wigan midfield. So definitely one I'm quite excited about, though. And then the final one was a man we brought in last Friday, Aaron Ramsey. Not that Aaron Ramsey, the Welsh one, but the man on loan from Aston Villa, who is the brother of Jacob Ramsey, a man that Dean Smith knows, obviously, being at Aston Villa. He's only 19 years of age, and probably one that's not really got that rave reviews from the Norwich fan base, but an attacking midfielder, a man with a little bit of potential. So a lot of optimism, I think, in terms of the way that Norwich are trying to sort of reconstruct the midfield. And I think they really hope then that the likes of sort of the other players they brought in last season, so Josh Sargent, who really struggled in the Premier League, just 2 goals, both of them came against Watford. I suppose players like him, Milot Rashica, if he is going to be here beyond the transfer window, then he's a man that really needs to step up, because you know there's a lot of expectations on his shoulders, and he should be doing a lot
big
better.
Money signing in the summer, wasn't he, last year?
Yeah, he's our record transfer signing, £9 million. So definitely someone that needs to be producing more in terms of an output, and you know, sort of finding that final ball, which he hasn't really got at the moment. So yeah, I think there's kind of a bit of a mixed feeling, but there's a lot of youth players still that are sort of coming back on. Bama Daly is a central defender that sort of made his mark in the Championship at the back end of the 2021 season. He was out injured for most of last season, and he's a young player. Only, I think he's 20 at the minute, or 21. He's an Irish international, and he's really sort of started the season well in that central defence alongside Grant Hanley. So the fact that we've still got Max Aarons on the books as well, I think that's definitely a positive. Arguably one of the best right backs in this division in the way that he can go forward and create. So, yeah, I think it's a mixed one. There's a lot of Norwich fans that feel that maybe Dean Smith's not the man, in the sense that he doesn't really have a football identity. Daniel Farke was very progressive. Norwich were very counter-attacking, and it was really exciting football. Norwich would go and win 4-3 every week, which, you know, as a football fan, it's very nervy, but you kind of enjoy it. Where with Dean Smith, it feels like maybe Norwich look for those 1-0 gritty victories, and I feel like that's probably going to be the way they're going to play this season.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Dean Smith, because he was brought in at a bit of a peculiar time. I thought that, especially the way it had happened the previous time, he'd gone up and down with Farke, that the board trusted him and would keep him again if they did go down. But then he won a game and then he got sacked. So I thought that was a bit of an interesting moment to bring him in. Of course, it was a very poor season. He said they hadn't given him the money to sign his own players. But you think, in a lower division, and he's had a whole pre-season and he's been able to bring in his players. Do you think Dean Smith is the right man for Norwich City?
I think there's a bit of a mixed opinion on him. He's not really got that bond. I mean, Daniel Farke had such a good bond with the Norwich City fans. I mean, every game that we won, he would go over it and sort of do this celebration wave after every single game. And he was such a loved character in this city. I mean, there's sort of murals on walls of him everywhere across the city. He's sort of arguably one of the greats of definitely recent times of Norwich City history, but probably in terms of the actual club's entire history, he's definitely up there. I mean, he brought 2 championship titles to this city, and particularly the first one where Norwich were in a division where you had the likes of Aston Villa, Leeds, West Brom, big teams that sort of had big budgets, and Norwich had been in the Championship for 3 seasons, and I think most people thought they were going to be a mid-table outfit, and he won the title. So to do that, and sort of such a loved man, to then go to Dean Smith, who his football is very different. I mean, I kind of alluded to it just before. Daniel Farke's football was really what I love watching. It's very possession based. But to me, we haven't really seen Dean Smith's football yet, because in the Premier League last season, he really had to set up to try and win games, which was make us a little bit more resolute, hard to beat, and we had to try and get some points. Obviously, we struggled to do that because we didn't really have the quality to, one, hold out the big boys in terms of them scoring against us, let alone have the firepower up top to actually score the goals we needed to win games. So I feel like the pressure's on him this season a little bit. Obviously, he got Aston Villa promoted, but I feel like there's maybe not an identity. I couldn't really tell you what a Dean Smith football inside looks like at the moment. I mean, he's trying to play a 4-3-3, experimented with a 4-2-3-1 the other day, which is kind of a Daniel Farke formation, really, is the way that we all knew him to play football. But last night was probably the first time I really felt there were signs of progression. I mean, Norwich did make 10 changes in the cup, but definitely in the way they were trying to approach the game, as well as the latter stages against Wigan, I felt like there was much more of an attacking identity to the team. And yeah, it's definitely coming along, but I feel like if Norwich aren't in that promotion mix, probably by the time we reach the World Cup, then I think Dean Smith is going to be under immense pressure, because this squad arguably should be in the top 6 mix without really having to sort of almost try it in sort of the nicest way possible. They are arguably too good for this division, but not good enough for the division above, which is sort of the tag that gets associated with Norwich City.
It just need a mini league where you play Fulham every week, really. Then that'd be perfect. But
we don't do very well against Fulham. So.
Oh, well, maybe not then. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, I think that both Fulham and Norwich will break their up and down yo-yo status. I think Fulham will stay up. I like silver, and I think Norwich will be in the playoffs, but not sure about Dean Smith. Decent coach, I would have thought, but I think you're probably right, because the squad is so good and there are so many players left from even the Premier League. I know they didn't do very well, but if you're bought for a Premier League team, you should really be pushing towards the higher end of the Championship, and you've still got Pukki and Cantwell and Max Aarons, as you said, who scored, didn't he, against Wigan. So I still think Norwich will be quite high this season, but it'll be a very interesting one. And good about the transfers, and they're all midfielders. Is there any other position you really need strengthening? Because 4 signings, is that enough? Are there any other players that Norwich want to sign?
I think a winger is probably the next position on the list, although I'd probably say that Norwich's business now will be very much dictated based on the outs. We haven't really sold any big name players yet. We've shifted on a lot of the deadwood. A lot of players have left whose contracts expired, or we've shifted on a lot of the younger players out on loan, and other players like Shemi Plaheta has gone on loan to Birmingham. There's a few others sort of in that sort of mix that maybe Dean Smith doesn't deem good enough for this Championship squad that he's shifted on. And I think if we maybe see a Milot Rashica leave, which is maybe one I expect to maybe make the move back to the Bundesliga, then I a winger, but the midfield is arguably the area that Norwich needed to address. They lost Lays Malou, he's gone back to France, and Lucas Rupp, his contract expired. They lost Billy Gilmore and Matthias Norman, who were here on loan last season. So they actually were down to pretty much the bare bones in terms of the central midfield. Just had Kenny McLean and Jacob Sorensen as sort of arguably the two that were championship standard left in the team. So they've addressed that area, and they really want to address the creative areas as well, because obviously they never really had an attacking midfielder last year, but now they feel like they're very much overstocked. They've got Kieran Dowell, they've got Todd Campbell, they've got young Aaron Ramsey they've now brought in. They've got a lot of kind of players there that can play that sort of attacking number 10 role, Nunez as well. So, yeah, they've definitely addressed the areas they really, really needed to. But I think a lot of Norwich fans want another central defender, but I personally don't see it. I think they see Hanley, Gibson, Onbama-Daly, and they've got young Jonathan Tompkinson, who made his debut last night, as sort of the four that they want to use going forward. So I think the wing is probably the only position that we might see one more bit of business done for Norwich. I think most of their business is probably done and dusted.
I usually ask us a little bit earlier, but I forgot to. Of course, it was 20th last season, talked about the signings. Where do you think Norwich will finish this season?
I definitely think we'll be in the top six. I'm probably not as optimistic as the time we dropped down last time. I think we had Emi Buendia and Timu Pukki, which is almost a bit of a cheat code in the Championship in terms of a combination, because you just guarantee goals. And we had Daniel Farker, who'd been there and done it before. And I feel like most fans were still kind of behind the project. And almost in some ways, Norwich were helped by the fact that the football was behind closed doors, because they arguably didn't really have any pressure on them, and they were too good for the Championship, that they just went to sort of these away grounds where maybe if you go to somewhere like a Rotherham and they've got the home crowd behind them, maybe the game's a little bit more difficult. Where Norwich,
it was the same with us. It was the same with us in League One. Although we were third best at home, and we sort of struggled at home, we won a lot of games like 1-0, whereas away we were just brilliant. So I think, it's the same. We had quality players just a league below. I'm sure that probably was a contributing factor. But this season, you think a decent chance still?
Yeah, I'd say I just think we've got too much squad depth quality that we definitely should be in the top six mix. I mean, there's nothing against the Championship as a whole, but I look at it these days and I probably don't fear it like I used to. I mean, teams like Newcastle have been in there, Aston Villa have been in there. But I look across that division now and I don't even really see Burnley and Watford as the threats that other teams have been when they come down to Norwich. So I think on that basis, we'll be in the top six. Not confident we'll be in the top two. I personally think we'll finish around about the fourth place position, and it'll be a playoff campaign for us. And that's kind of my prediction. And I don't know how that's going to play out. I'd like to hope we can make it to Wembley. Whether we'd win there, I don't know. But I still think a lot of Norwich fans want to see, though, progress in terms of Dean Smith. If Norwich aren't promoted this season, then to me, it's probably going to be labels of a failure because there's too much riding on it. Norwich have ultimately, again, spent almost £10 million this window, which in a Championship where there's not really this big money transfers like there used to be in the past, the expectations there maybe that we are going to do something. And Dean Smith's already had sort of almost a year now with this squad, so he knows what this squad's capable of, and he's had a chance to sort of mould that identity that he wants to try and bring to this club. So if it doesn't work, then it's a failure, and I feel like Norwich will have to do a whole reset next summer because a lot of the players like Pukki, Kenny McLean, Tim Krul, they'll all be looking to move on next summer if Norwich in the Premier League. So, it's a big season for us.
Yeah, I mean, the financial model Norwich seemed to be following is, although last season he did spend money, that model won't work if you don't go up. It's fine if you stay up and it's fine if you keep going up and down, but if you don't go up, then those parachute payments will run out. So, okay. Well, let's move on to the first two, at least, league games that you've played. Lost to Cardiff on the opening day and then drew to Wigan 1-1, but had a lot of the ball in those two games. So what went wrong?
Cardiff was just a really poor performance from both teams, quite frankly. I looked at the expected goals after the game, and I think Cardiff's was 0.08 and Norwich was 0.36. It was basically a 0-0 game, and it was one bit of quality from Romain Sawyers, which took a deflection off Onbama-Daly and nestled in the corner. And ultimately, that's just changed the game and nicked it for Cardiff. It was a game that I think if it was ended 0-0, most fans would have come out of the stadium from both clubs feeling that was probably a fair result. And Dean Smith definitely felt that it was a a 0-0 game. So a little bit frustrating, but I think Cardiff are obviously a little bit of an unexpected team as well this season in the way they've done a lot of transfer business. And I think it's about 13 or 14 signings down there. So a little bit unknown. And Norwich is sort of still trying to get over this hangover from sort of last season being so bad and a losing
mentality. Exactly, jinx. Yeah. It's very difficult to get out of that.
Norwich are notoriously very bad starters in the Championship. I mean, if you look at our last 2 or 3 seasons down here where we won the title or got promoted, you look at the first 6-7 games, Norwich have never really won games early doors. They've always maybe just ground out draws, and it's always been sort of that end of September period where they kick on and then they'll go on runs where they'll win 7 or 8 games on the bounce, and that's where they get themselves flying up the table in terms of sort of trying to push for the top 2. So yeah, not the best of performances. Wigan was a strange one. The first 20 minutes, Norwich was like they played them off the park. They were so good. Nunez was really creative, and a lot of Norwich fans were excited by his early performance. And Wigan sort of blew us a little bit of a sucker punch. James McLean, and it was a poor back pass from Ben Gibson, who a lot of Norwich fans are starting to feel maybe isn't the man that we need in this central defensive area. But Grant Hanley was suspended from the week before, so he was basically, Dean Smith was forced into this change, and he obviously gifted Wigan the opening goal, and then the game went a little bit flat up until half-time. Norwich came out, and I think Milot Rashica, after about 10 seconds into the second half, had an effort on goal, and that really kind of got the crowd back behind Norwich, and Max Aarons buries the goal in about the 60th minute to pull us level, and then it was basically one-way traffic for the rest of the last 30 minutes where Norwich were doing everything they could to try and score, and it's a penalty decision really at the end that's kind of clouded over this game and prevented Norwich picking up points. It was a bit of a rash tackle on Max Aarons, which I can see the argument of he's won the ball, but effectively his studs were very high, has gone through Max Aarons and left a really nasty sort of mark on his shin. So one that should have been a penalty, and most Norwich fans thought they should have got 3 points. So I think if Norwich had 4 points on the board right now, I wouldn't have been surprised. It's kind of just come down to a refereeing decision and one little bit of quality in a game that was very, very bad. So not necessarily negative on the first 2 games. I think Norwich have got to improve, but I think most fans are positive that it's just kind of that early season syndrome, and it's getting over that losing mentality from last season and trying to sort of change that in terms of the footballing culture back to a winning mentality for the season.
Yeah, I think Hull City fans are hoping the same, although we've got the 4 points, but we haven't played well, especially against Preston. But so you think early season sort of getting over that mentality, is it a good time to be playing against Norwich?
I'd say so. I think this is probably the time you want to play us. I think if you were playing us 10 games down the line, I think we'd be a different side completely. I mean, a little bit hard to say because we don't really know what a Dean Smith team looks like. And I think if it was Daniel Parker in charge right now, I'd tell you in 10 games' time we'd be in the top 6 because he just knows the Championship. He's too good as a manager for the Championship. And that's why he's now at Borussia Mönchengladbach, who are one of the big boys in the Bundesliga. So he's a very good manager. But to now have Dean Smith, I think, it probably is a good time to play us. We're still kind of getting used to life back in the Championship and sort of the differing styles of teams in this league. And obviously we've got a lot of new midfielders that are trying to bed in. And we've got a few injuries as well, which is arguably, again, we lost both our left backs. Yanulis suffered a really, really bad injury last week against Wigan that's going to keep him out for 2 months. And Sam McCallum, our backup left back, went off injured as well last night in the cup game. So we've not really got a recognised left back at the moment, and we're a little bit light in terms of the central defence. So, in terms of the injuries we've got and the fact that we've not really started very well, I suppose it probably is a good time to play us. But by the same token, we've maybe sort of just about got over that on the fact that we got that penalty shootout win last night. And I feel like there's a little bit more positivity going into Saturday's game, which could be a dangerous one in terms of if Norwich really take it to Hull early doors and maybe get an early goal.
Well, I'm a little bit encouraged after hearing that, really. Another thing we do is look at what do you think the lineup is going to be. So what do you think the starting 11 is going to be for Norwich on Saturday?
I think there's probably a bit of debate in terms of the goalkeeper. Tim Krul, not the best of starts to the season, struggled a little bit here and there, but Angus Gunn as well last night made 2 big penalty saves in the penalty shootout and really looked pretty much on top form, and he's a man that actually started to get ahead of Tim Krul towards the back end of last season in the Premier League. So definitely a bit of debate in terms of the goalkeeper, but I think that Dean Smith will just stick with Tim Krul just due to the fact that he's obviously a Dutch international goalkeeper. He's got a wealth of Premier League and Championship experience, and going to somewhere like Hull, he's going to know what to expect. So I think Tim Krul will be in goal. Left back's probably the one we're going to struggle with here because we don't actually have a recognised fit left back. And
same for us 2 weeks ago, yeah.
So we're kind of waiting to hear a little bit on Sam McCallum's injury, but I'd probably expect Jacob Sorensen to fill in at left back. He's a bit versatile as a player. He's actually a central midfielder, but I think he's played centre half, left back, right back, pretty much every single position you could name on that pitch apart from in goal for Norwich.
Utility player, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dean Smith actually referenced him as a polyfiller player the other day, which is probably about the right way to word that. That's exactly what he is. So he probably started left back. In terms of the central defenders, I think that's probably nailed on. It'll be Grant Hanley, who'll be coming back from his suspension, and it'll be Andrew Omobamidele at centre half. And that's pretty much the combination I think most Norwich fans want to see for the rest of the season, unless there's injuries or suspension. Right back will be Max Aarons. Came on as well last night in the Cup against Birmingham, and he's been arguably probably the best spark so far this season in terms of playing from right back. So he will be starting at right back. The midfield's probably a little bit again unknown, just based on we don't really know what the injury pitch is going to look like. But I'd expect it to be something like Kenny McLean will start. It'll probably be a 4-3-3, so it'll be Kenny McLean probably alongside Nunez, and then probably Gabriel Sara. I think both of those sort of new players will probably get their opportunities in the team on Saturday. And then in terms of the wide positions, I think Dano Sonani scored last night, who was on loan at Huddersfield last year.
Yeah.
And based on the fact that Josh Sargent hasn't restarted the season very well and Milot Rashica hasn't started the season very well, I think Sonani probably can expect to start. Timu Pukki will be spearheading the attack. And then if Todd Cantwell's fit, then I think Todd Cantwell will start on the other side. And I'm really hopeful that Sonani and Cantwell can provide the service to Pukki that he needs to score goals.
Yeah, because the service is exactly what Hull City are lacking at the moment. We've got these two new strikers who they both started against Preston, and although they didn't play very well, if you don't, strikers are only really as good as you allow them to be with the other players. So if we have, a Cantwell or a Sonani-esque player, we should have that with some injuries coming back. We've got Doğukan Sinik, who's a Turkish international winger. He should be able to give the service to them, but they're struggling for that. But I think maybe hearing about Norwich having a bit of a tough start and getting over that losing mentality, and I think we're sort of doing a similar thing with the fitness issues. I might go for a sort of tight 1-0 game that Norwich might dominate, but we might get a bit lucky. So what do you think what's the predicted score for you?
Yeah, I think Norwich are going to sort of try and dominate the ball. That's what they've tried to do in the first two games. And I'll be honest, I think this could be our first win. I think it'll be narrow. We don't really score a lot of goals, but we have been defensively quite strong so far this season. I mean, it's been sort of a lucky deflected goal that Cardiff got, and then Wigan's goal was basically a defensive error. So aside from that, we've been relatively resolute at the back and not really giving many chances away. So I'll go 2-1. I think Norwich will take the lead, and then we'll be pegged back and just find the winner somewhere later on in the game, which is something we've done quite well in the Championship, is find those late goals to win games where we maybe haven't been at our best, but we grind out 3 points, and that's kind of been the recipe for success in the past two times we've been in the league. Yeah.
Well, cool. I think we've covered everything, unless there's anything you want to add.
No, I think thanks for inviting me onto your podcast, and
yes, it's been a pleasure.
Fill in everyone on Norwich City and the joys of us in the Championship.
Yeah. So where can people, listeners, find your content?
Yeah, so I'm from The Pink 'Un, which is a newspaper based in Norwich, but we are all across the digital platforms. So there's the Pink 'Un YouTube channel where we have all our sort of match coverage in terms of previews. We also speak to the managers, so we get all the press conference related content. And there's also sort of match vlog related content as well. There's lots of stuff on there. And we also do like match reports and written based content as well in terms of transfers and all around the game cycle. So lots of really good content, and that's found at pinkun.com. So definitely one that if you want to sort of get any sort of Hull City insight or anything based on the match, then that's probably a good place to head for Saturday's game as well.
Yeah. Do you want to explain the origin of the name as well? Because I thought this was quite interesting.
Yeah, this is one that even when I accepted the job, a lot of my friends were saying, "Why is it called that? Why is it called the Pink 'Un?" Basically, the backstory behind it is that it's been going about 40 or 50 years now. But originally, it was printed on pink paper, it was kind of a football-based newspaper that would come out on a Saturday evening after a game, and fans could go and pick up a copy kind of 2 hours after the game, and that would be on basically a pink piece of paper, which is sort of a bit of a strange one. But Ipswich Town used to do the same thing, but theirs was called the Green 'Un, which for a team that play in blue, and Norwich playing yellow and green does seem
Yeah.
a little bit strange, but that's basically the context behind it, and it's a name that's stuck, and it still remains the biggest media outlet in Norwich City, sort of covering the club externally. So we're now based digitally, and we're still in the newspapers. We have a supplement that goes in the papers every single day that's just Norwich City based football content. So it's well read and well liked across the board from all the fan base.
Okay, marvellous. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and the Title Back podcast will be back next week for a Burnley and maybe West Brom preview as well, and then to review the 0-0 draw with Preston and the cup defeat to Bradford. So thanks for coming on, and thank you for listening.